Hi students, in this video we're going to look at the way cultural patterns on the macro scale affect our micro scale life experiences. And when I talk about cultural patterns, we're going to look at social facts, we're going to look at social institutions and the social facts that are related to them and how it affects our micro scale lives in the United States. This is going to be specific with United States examples. We've already learned that culture is different from place to place, and therefore you should expect the cultural pattern that goes with social institutions to be different from place to place also. The social institutions don't necessarily differ from place to place because we're very generic with our list of social institutions. Please observe what the examples that I have on the board here. Our social institution examples are family, religion, economy, government. These are very, very general terms. And we're going to look at the way these things are connected to each other and filter out with U.S. cultural patterns and social facts and how it affects our micro scale life experiences. That's what we're going to do in this video. But briefly, what I want to tell you is that when we go from one culture to the next, that's where we have to make sure that we are aware of ethnocentrism and we are practicing cultural relativism to the extent that it is possible. We have to be aware that there are other religious patterns, for instance, in the world than the common one that's in the United States. We have to, for instance, recognize that capitalism is not the only economic system that exists in the world, and norms of culture change from one place to the next based on the macro scale pattern that the economy takes. The governmental system that we have, which is a representative republic with democratic sort of opportunities in our society, that is not necessarily the governmental pattern that exists on the macro scale in other places where monarchies exist or oligarchies exist, and all of the different government patterns that you will learn in your political science class, for instance. Okay, so in this lecture, we're going to look specifically at the United States and look at how these social institutions filter out into U.S. culture. So certainly the social facts about U.S. culture are family takes what we call a nuclear family organization, not an extended family organization. So let's talk about, here's my air quotes, normal. Let's talk about normal expectations in daily life based on the fact that we have a nuclear family pattern that's expected and not an extended family pattern that is expected. Let me explain what these two terms mean briefly. Nuclear family is defined roughly like this. It's a one or a two-parent household with their children, with the children of those people living in that household with them. Nobody else lives in that household, just the adult and the children, or the adults and the children. And when I say adults plural, it's two. Two is the expectation. There will be two parents. And the reason there are two parents as the expectation, two as the adults, the responsible parties in the room, is because the religious pattern that we have in the United States, Christianity, that's the social fact of our religious pattern. In the United States, we have Christianity. There are lots of other religious patterns in the world. Hinduism is the dominant religion in India, and Islam is the dominant religion in Saudi Arabia and Oman and Yemen and other places in the Middle East, all over the United Arab Emirates. Judaism is the dominant religion in Israel. There are Christian countries also. The United States is a Christian foundational country. We don't require that you are Christian, but our laws and our economic system and our family patterns are wrapped up in Christian ideology that create certain micro-scale experiences for us, whether you yourself are Christian or not. And one of the Christian patterns that you experience, whether you yourself are Christian, is monogamy, where there is one union between two people. Not more than two people, okay? So that is a social fact in the USA. When a kindergartner is in their kindergarten classroom right now and it's story time, you open up a storybook, and when you read about a family, it's about two parents and the kids, or one parent and the kids. That's the nuclear family description. We don't typically read about or hear about families that have multiple generations, 3, 4 generations of people, multiple siblings and their spouses and kids, aunts and uncles, mothers and fathers. Grandparents, we don't really hear about households that are made up of extended family units in the United States. Not yet. We might be on the verge of changing that. But in the United States, we have a nuclear family pattern, which means monogamy, and 1 or 2 parents in that nuclear household. You're supposed to be responsible economically for the people within your household. So we have to give, or we are responsible for obligations and also benefits that people in our household expect of us because of the social fact of nuclear families, monogamy, Christianity. The economic system is designed where, in cases like my husband and me, we're married legally. We have a legal status of marriage, and therefore I can add him to the benefits of my work. But also, if something happened and he wasn't able to contribute economically, I have an obligation to be the economic contributor. If our for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health kind of thing occurs, we have that obligation. And it's not just to the spouses, it's to the children that we have. There is an economic obligation and benefits obligation that we must raise up those children and take care of their needs while they can't take care of their needs themselves. We're obligated to do that kind of thing. And I've already mentioned we have a legal status, because in the United States, this is not this way everywhere, but in the United States, the legal status of a marriage is very, very important. You can't just declare one day to all your family and friends, hey, you know what, we married each other the other day after breakfast. We just decided to walk outside and scream, we're married now, and bingo, here we are. That's not recognized. There are a lot of hoops that you have to jump through, licenses and fees and all of this kind of stuff that you have to go through in order to be legally status married in the United States. And that affects micro-scale life experiences in a variety of ways. So, you see my words normal on the board over here. These are my air quotes for normal. If you're going to be normal in the United States in your micro-scale life experience, then you will have a mom, you'll have a dad, and you'll have kids living together, not 2 or 3 aunts and uncles, also your grandparents, not your cousins. You won't have all those extended family members living in the same household. That's not normal. We expect 1 or 2 parents to be with the children in the household and work independently. Okay, we expect the economy, I'm jumping to the economy here, we expect in the United States that there will be a breadwinner and a homemaker in the household. And those are 2 different statuses that exist in our minds. You probably immediately know what I'm talking about, whether you yourself are a breadwinner or a homemaker yet. Breadwinning and homemaking must happen. Sometimes when it's a 1-parent household, that all of that gets, becomes the responsibility of that single parent. When there's a 2-parent household, you can split up these obligations. They aren't necessarily split, right down the middle, that one person is the breadwinner and one person is the homemaker. Maybe you split breadwinning and homemaking down the middle, but these 2 statuses, the roles that go with that status has to be present in that household. And so the normal way to be is 2 parents, 1 parent or 2 parents in a household. It's so much easier economically to get by in our society with our social expectations, our norms, our folk ways, and the expectations that we have in life. It's so much easier to have 2 adults at the head of the household, because that does make it easier to split up all the duties that are in not only within just your household, but the social expectations that come from above that guide our microscale life experiences. These kinds of things are the responsibility of the adults in the household, and since we have a nuclear family expectation, the maximum number of adults that we expect to have in the household is 2. Now, a lot of people have more than 2. A lot of people do live with grandparents or an aunt or an uncle or something like that. So there are some changes that are happening to this, but currently the pattern that we expect is a nuclear family, which is 1 or 2 parents in the household. That 2-parent traditional, here's another air quote, traditional expectation of the nuclear family is an economic expectation. Our society on the micro scale expects you to have breadwinner and homemaker in the same household, and it's typically 2 people. That's the expectation. That's why single parents have a much harder row to hoe, so to speak, if you know that old phrase, than two-parent households. Okay. And then look at this microscale life experience, the one on the bottom down here about the government regulates the legal status of marriages and families. And so marriage is a legal contract. We will look more deeply into marriage as we get to future lessons and how and why it's a legal contract situation according to the government. Only 2 people can enter into it legally and be, inherit each other's Social Security and inherit each other's property and this kind of thing. We have something that says common law. I look at it now and my handwriting is a little bit messy. We have something in some states, not every state in the USA, but in some states in the USA, there is this concept called common law marriage. And common law, it varies from state to state. There's not one standard that everybody uses. I think Arkansas used to have it, and I want to say, and we don't have it anymore, I think, is the truth. And I believe that when we did have it, 5 years was like a magic number, which basically meant that if you cohabitated, I've also got this word cohabitation on the board down here. I hope that you can see this, these words. Let me move this out of the way. There we go. Cohabitation on the bottom down here. That means when you're living together without the legal status of marriage, your grandma would call it shacking. And so cohabitation doesn't have any legal protections of marriage. Just watch any Judge Judy episode where people were living together and they have to split up everything that they tried to buy as a couple. And Judge Judy will fuss at you and say, never sign, for a truck lease for somebody who, you're not married to, because you're just gonna be stuck with that bill, and nothing to show for it. So common law in some states creates a situation where if you cohabitate without marriage, without the legal protections of marriage, after a certain period of time, 5 years I think is what it used to be in Arkansas when we allowed this kind of thing. But if you successfully live together and stay together for 5 years or longer, there is this concept called common law in some states where the state can, if you ever break up, like 12 years down the road or something, if you ever do break up, like some marriages end in divorce, this gives you a little bit of protection. Maybe the same protection, maybe not quite all the same protections, but otherwise, if you're just living together, shacking, like your grandma says, and you decide to break up, there's no legal protection for either one of you in order to be able to know who gets the dining room table and who gets the washer and dryer and who gets the big screen TV and who gets the Game Boy, whatever. There is no legal recourse that you have. And so that's why, one reason why people recommend not doing that without marriage. That's a non-religious reason why. But the legal status of marriage comes from our religious norm of monogamy in our United States. And also I have this word on the board over here to acknowledge children who are born outside of wedlock. Look at all of my air quotes here, and I've got this one in air quotes. This is a legal word. The word that I'm pointing at is bastard. You've heard it before, undoubtedly. A lot of times we use it as a derogatory word to talk about a man, but it's a legal word that refers to any child who is born outside of wedlock. It used to be a big deal. It's not a big deal anymore. We've seen a social change, quite a significant social change, and now it is not at all a big deal for whether the parents are married when the child is born. There are ways to get around that. Used to, if the parents were not married at the time a child was born, the father's name would be left off the birth certificate. There wouldn't be a birth certificate. There wouldn't be a father's name listed. It would just be the mother's name. And this used to have a significant stigma with it. That stigma is entirely gone, but the legal status is still an issue. So this day and age, it's very common for people to not be married, and we have changed our legal processing for recording births, and unmarried parents both can be listed on a birth certificate. If a person is married, however, there is no question. You don't have to make sure or get permission or anything like that. There's always that legal status. That means even if a woman got pregnant from another sexual relationship, which, look at my air quotes, should not happen based on the patterns that we expect in the United States. But if parents are married, if a husband and wife exist and the wife got pregnant from someone else, not the husband, in this culture today, in this age, the husband is listed as the father on the birth certificate, whether that baby is actually his, whether he is actually the sperm donor, so to speak, of that child or not. So that marriage automatically makes him the father. And so there are some legal statuses that we can observe, some legal status issues that we can observe on the micro scale that affect this kind of pattern in life. So on this week's quiz, you're going to have a couple of questions that ask you to make some connections between a social institution and what a micro scale life experience might be. So if you need to do a little research when you get to those questions, and maybe try to find out what different cultural patterns are, please do that. You will also see in this reflection journal prompt that I ask you to do that in your week 6 reflection journal. So please keep that in mind and text me with questions, and I will see you for more next time.